Hey guys, my name is Hab and this is the Prowler, a tier 8 hybrid nation, heavy, kind of, sort of, not really. Yeah, this one's a little complicated. No thanks to Wargaming for basically making it a really strange all-rounder. It's been growing on me over the battles I've had in it, but more like a fungus rather than a great experience. I can say it definitely looks cool though. Looks kind of like a Leopard 2 inspired model. So without further ado, let's get to it. So the gun. Where do we begin? Well, the good points. 420 alpha with an acceptable reload. This means that you actually have DPM over 2000, which with tier 8 heavies is more rare than we'd like to admit. The Prowler deals good module damage, has decent gun depression, and yeah, that's it. I will say that the Prowler's gun being buffed is a difficult proposition, as the way the tank performs would easily pull it over the edge if it got something significant, but what I would like to suggest here is a soft stats buff. The dispersion value itself is quite fine actually, it's around 0.34, which is far more acceptable than the usual horror show of Russian and Chinese heavies around this tier. The aim time is okay, it could be better, but it could also be a lot worse. What I mean to say is that this tank might give you an urge to snapshot, which you really, and I mean really, should avoid. The soft stats prevent any reasonable shots while on the move. This is more of a static tank than I personally like. It moves like a medium, so you might get that urge, but don't. It's seriously not worth the try. Penetration is very average on all rounds, and the fact that the Prowler has an anemic APCR round as its premium choice is pretty disappointing. Giving it 270 heat would have been more interesting. The gun is generally functional, but you cannot expect anything outstanding out of it. The armor is where it sounds good on paper, but then you look at the armor profile and it rapidly falls apart. The Prowler's armor is not reliable at any tier it can fight in. The hull is quite aggressively angled, but the upper plate can be penetrated by any shell with around 230mm of penetration. The lower hull is quite prominent and a very easy shot, as it is only around 100mm. So you would think that the tactic is to face hug, right? Well, sure, but that's also not a good idea. The Prowler's frontal turret angles are quite good, the issue isn't with those, but the mantlet area is flat, and at the base armor value, so anything with around 190mm of penetration can just go through the turret front with relatively few problems. See what I mean about the armor profile? This isn't really the armor of a reliable heavy, but more so a medium tank. The cupolas on the top of the turret are also a relatively easy shot, and because of the weird angles going into the side scraping is also a hard proposition. This is not a tank you can sit with behind a bit of hard cover and soak shots. This is no 252U or anything like that. Why? Well, the mobility and the rest really seals the deal. Before we get to what's ultimately the Prowler's party piece, we should mention the mobility, which is thankfully really good. It really belies the heavy tank classification the tank gets, as without any special provisions, the Prowler is already pushing 43 km per hour, and it gets there. The power to weight ratio can easily exceed 19 horsepower per ton, which is a quite solid figure for any heavy tank, let alone the Prowler. The traverse figures are good, it can hit around 50 degrees a second, the turret turns at around 26, which is also quite solid, but more importantly, the terrain coefficients are also very much okay. The Prowler genuinely can maintain a good top speed, which is where we're pushing into the gimmick that the Prowler has. The Prowler has a gimmick. Well, it has more than one. First off, the Prowler has combat stabilization, emergency tracks, and a track regeneration mechanic that the Dracula has. This means the Prowler is actually quite good at peeking, and when it gets shot, the track repair is quite quick. I will be blunt and say that due to the way provisions work in Reforged, by being basically shot behind the shed, the track regen works considerably better there. In current Blitz I was saved by this track regen maybe 2 or 3 times. The emergency track has never been particularly useful to me, just like on the Yo series of tanks and like on one of the recent additions to the game, the BZT-70. I must admit that it was so insignificant I almost forgot to mention it in the script. So the regen mechanic is very whatever, and emergency tracks just as much, but due to the soft stats of the gun, the combat stabs are actually quite useful. The next gimmick is that you have access to every super consumable. I don't like this kitchen sink solution to tanks, but the Prowler can get away with it somewhat as it is a unique vehicle. Doing this to long abandoned tanks is not a solution, but I digress. This means you get access to the super engine boost, reticle calibration, reactive armor, and tungsten. Of these four, you should really only consider using two, the reticle cal and the tungsten. The engine boost is unnecessary as the Prowler is already quite quick. Improving on this does not help you, it's not a major buff. Reticle calibration fixes the gun's largest problem, and running consumable delivery system in your equipment instead of high-end consumables means that the cooldown is actually quite fast. You can get it back within under 50 seconds. Reactive armor is not actually particularly helpful in regular battles. I think it might be more reliable within competitive matches, but nobody who plays tier 8 tournaments will bring a Prowler because there's simply better options. Tungsten is the only other consumable you should consider, as an alpha increase is always good, but I would personally recommend the reticle calibration. Tungsten has the longest cooldown of all the super consumables, lasts for only a shot or two if you get lucky, and you have to contend with the gun being inaccurate. Now I might hear some of you suggest to simply run both reticle cal and tungsten. I did this for about 10 battles before giving up on that. The reason is pretty simple, because the Prowler loses modules way too often to not run a multi-purpose repair kit and another repair kit. You should do the same and keep only one of the super consumables, and honestly I might stick with the reticle cal. It's simply too useful to not use, especially in combination with the combat stabs. So this also makes equipment quite interesting. I normally don't mention it anymore, but I'll make an exception for the Prowler. So, gunner armor, defense system, optics, gun length drive, improved assembly, engine accelerator, and then personally I'd say you should try switching between the vertical stabilizer and refined gun and see what you prefer. I personally actually prefer the vert stabs, which is really rare for me. I usually just go for the refined gun. Next, the toolbox, since repairs are always useful to speed up, and then I personally run the consumable delivery system for faster cooldowns, so I can use the reticle cal as often as possible. As for my provisions, I run field rations, improved gear oil, and improved fuel, but here you can also try an experiment. Replacing one of the provisions for a protective kit is a pretty good idea. Some people use the sandbag armor, but I think that makes sense more on something like the Kanavan, which actually has a good gun to complement its whole package. Improved gunpowder is not worth running. So, the pros and cons. The pros, good mobility, decent firepower, decent gun depression, and good versatility. And the cons, unreliable armor and mediocre accuracy. The Prowler is quite a conflicting tank, as I basically got it for a couple dollars, actually like $3.99, as I had saved up an enormous amount of gold over the months. It meant I got it basically immediately and I could get to playing it. And I'll be honest, I was actually pretty underwhelmed. It got considerably better once I learned to stop my habits of snapping shots like I do in most mediums, because to be fair, once you get to playing it, that habit also settles in. It's an interesting tank to play every now and then, though it's far from one I would main at this tier, especially considering the Grom exists. I'm gonna say it's worth getting, but only under the condition that it is available for actual gold and it's 10k or less, as it is an interesting novelty, but not worth more money. And with that, there's some time for a replay, bespoke and crafted by the greatest Linux craftsman I could find. Alright, so I am actually doing this through my phone, so this might be a little bit janky, but nevertheless, I am currently trying to rush out the last bit of voiceover because I kind of don't want to, be a little bit too late with the video. I have promised it for ages at this point. So, the first replay, what you're going to see anyway, is basically how the Prowler performs as a heavy tank. Needless to say, it doesn't actually perform that great, and that's what I hope to actually point out with this, because the Prowler really is not a heavy tank, despite the specifications. First off, you can actually hide the lower plate relatively reliably. The problem is with the rest of the armor profile, as I have already illuminated. This does mean that you are quite susceptible to the shots, and by the way, if you saw that camera shaking, that was because the dog had attacked me at that point. The dog just came in and wanted hugs. But yeah, essentially, the entire start of this battle is quite disastrous. The battle itself is actually relatively short, but you can see that once you actually run Radical Cal with those combat stabs, you do actually have a decently accurate gun. It's nothing outstanding, but without those combat stabs, it would have been quite frustrating. This is a mistake on my end, where I had expected the IS-5 to be a little bit, less brave, and same goes for the enemy Prowler. But it does quite ideally show how this entire thing works. As a heavy tank, the Prowler just does not work well at all, which is why I prefer running it as like a sort of a medium tank of sorts. I'm not really sure if I am rambling because of the heat or because I keep thinking about that delicious, delicious vanilla beer that I have in the fridge, but, well, I hope you understand. It's been quite a while since I made any sort of long-term video, and for those whom it may concern, I'm actually going to illuminate a little bit of what I have been doing in the meantime when I was basically inactive. The reason that I was so inactive was mostly because I was finishing my studies. I am done with studying, at least for the time being. I have a master's degree now, a master's degree in English. I have a bachelor's in English and Czech, and I am going to be a full-time teacher starting late August, which of course is also gonna cut into my free time by a significant margin. So that is one other thing, really. Then, outside that, this is actually the first video that I'm making on my desktop, and the desktop used to run Windows 11, and the experience was so horrid that I have switched to Linux full-time. This is all running on a Linux-based desktop. Proton G is just magical. While the second replay is gonna run in the background, I'm also gonna continue on a little bit about this. I am using KDE Live. I'm not really sure how you pronounce it because Linux programs are sometimes a little bit weird, but this is the first video that I intend to make with KDE Live, and I'm gonna be honest, I could have run DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is relatively well supported on Linux. That is actually not that problematic. The actual big problem is that I'm running an Intel Arc card, and Intel Arc, all of the Intel Arc cards come with native AV1 decode and AV1 encode, which I do kind of need to preserve some sort of quality when uploading it on YouTube. As you might remember, some of the older videos, they were quite pixelated. And this is basically the only way that I can really do that. And DaVinci Resolve, on Linux especially, does not give you AV1 encoding unless you pay for the studio license because you need access to plugins, which I thought was pretty much a deal breaker for me. I like Resolve, but I don't like it that much to pay $300. So that's the reason why I'm using KDE's solution instead. It's been okay. Text has been very janky, and filters are a little bit difficult to add, but that is basically it. Most of my audio setup is still basically the same. I have a new room, which also does help a little bit, and now that everything on my end is done, I hope to release a couple of videos during the summer holiday period. We'll see how bad the heatwave is. Right now, I'm seeing that I might have around 35 to 36 Celsius in my area, which is not great, but they're all kind of having to go through that now. Anyway, what you're seeing here in this replay is me trying to play the Prowler in a more of a mobile, medium, heavium role, which already has worked out significantly better because the only reason why I really only lost that much health was because I exposed myself to the IC-152 accidentally. The first time, that would have been forgivable, but the second time was a little bit of a stretch. There is not really that much to say about the Prowler's gameplay, in that it is really a tank with an armor profile that you cannot trust. This is sort of a dilemma that I have with some other tier 8 tanks, where people say, like, oh, it has a really great armor. It has great armor to an extent. The Prowler can really work on terrain, and if you hide that monstrous lower plate, because it is huge. Otherwise, it is gonna get penetrated by absolutely everything, because that lower plate is weak. However, I am really not quite sure how you would balance the tank minus improving the soft stats, because those are actually genuinely quite weak. Which is a shame, but thankfully we do have the combat stats. I shall figure out which video I might do next, because I do actually have replays for both the M6Yo, and I have a pretty decent replay for the Chieftain Mark 6. Both of those are already recorded, so the only thing that I would really need to do is like just some additional b-roll and the voiceover. So if I decide on either of those two, they are actually going to be relatively fast videos to produce, but that is an entirely different topic. As I had said in the previous voiceover before the replays, the Prowler really is a tank that you will have to contemplate quite a lot before actually committing to buying it. But yeah, basically that is my verdict. That has been it. You know the spiel. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, whatever, and I'll see you guys later on either of those two videos that I had promised.